Kia ora. So we've talked for the 18th time about the inadequacy and the complexity of the funding model, the special needs funding model, but we've also talked about Bryce raising the issue of the teacher training that is happening these days and whether it is fully preparing teachers for what they're going to find in the classroom. And Linda talking very specifically about initiatives she's done that she believes are transportable to other schools to specifically professionalise teachers in neurodiversity. Where does the union come at the whole question of what should happen from here? We know full well where we're at. We've known that for years. What's the NZEI's position?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, there wasn't anything that Ross or Linda said that I disagreed with. There is that sense that there are some opportunities ahead of us that we need to be exploring. But the overall sense that's coming through so loudly from the sector is that we are under-resourced by way of staffing in the primary sector. There just aren't enough hands on the ground. And a lot of what sits centrally to what Linda was talking about is the value of relationships. Relationships take time, and realistically, when you've got classes of 30 plus in the primary school systems, the amount of time a teacher has to form those good, strong, authentic relationships is limited. We settled the teacher aid pay equity claim towards the middle of last year, and there were three outworkings of that around the development of a career pathway for teacher aides in the country, an exploration into how teacher aides are currently funded and where to next, and then around the overuse of fixed-term contracts. We're really optimistic that the conversation around how TAs are funded are going to be moving towards some form of centralisation, which is something that we know is going to be key to give principals certainty around who their teacher aid workforce is, and then to be able to spend the time developing them as a workforce.
Okay, so you are optimistic that there will be ministry funding specifically for teacher aides and not this business of trading it off against something else in your operations budget. What are better ways to invest what funding there is for special needs and perhaps to argue for some more? Do you believe there needs to be a system overhaul of who can access funding and for what?
Yeah, so we are underfunded in the primary sector, and in particular around staffing. The opportunity that we have, which isn't the be-all and end-all, is around the opportunity to bring in central funding for teacher aides, because we know that the current model of principals trading off teacher aid hours and development against all of the other things that they have to pay has come and gone. This was the same argument that we used around bulk funding teachers in 1990, and that is completely gone. Where we do get a slightly more challenged landscape for teacher aides is that often the number of teacher aides a school needs is based on need, not just on role size. But certainly that principle of central funding of teachers' salaries is something that we'll need to be looking at.
The needs are underestimated wherever you look. And certainly trying to get it over the line. But come back to the teachers and the professional development of the teachers as well, because both of our principals here saying this. Bryce saying he does not believe they are coming out of teacher training now with the necessary toolkit or experience with, again, we talk about problematic behaviours, but what Linda's focusing us on is actually understanding what's happening with these children. It's a higher sophistication even than having a suite of behavioural techniques. It's knowing what's going on and being able to individually tailor your response. Do you believe, again, there is role, again, for central investment in this kind of professional development and not leaving it up to a proactive school managing to get something done and another school either not having the leadership or not having the resources to be able to go and do this? Does it need to be more centralised?
Yes. Yes is the answer. I think it's too simplistic just to put this on the hands of initial teacher education. The reality is, though, is that as a sector we don't do change management particularly well, and that is a feature of tomorrow's schools. It's around local schools having their own autonomy to work out how best to solve their issues. I think around issues like this is where we see that system isn't fit for purpose.
Thank you, all of you. The budget is not far away. Liam, you had a level of optimism about the centralising of funding for teacher aides. Do you believe there has or will be any other initiatives dealing with this particular area that causes so much angst for schools, for families, and particularly for students?
and given the level of under-resourcing that we have within the primary sector now, we have to see something through the budget.
Thank you very much, all three of you. And that's Bryce Coleman, Parramatta School Principal and President of the Mana Primary Principals Association, the President of the NZDI, Liam Rutherford, I was just speaking to there, and before that also Linda Knight, Principal of Glenview School in Cannons Creek. A lot of feedback from you on this. I'll read some of it now. I'm in teacher training at Auckland University, and there are a large number of student teachers experiencing high levels of anxiety who are receiving professional mental health support. Many student teachers in my intake feel the training is inadequate for being a sole charge teacher next year. Every class has children with behavioural and learning needs that teachers are not being equipped for. Ewan says it's not only a lack of teaching practice that's part of the problem with not having dedicated teacher training colleges, it's also not having lectures and discussions about real classroom practices from actual teachers rather than university lecturers. Kathy says the ministry has hung the schools out to dry by structuring programs so that the school is left to chase the ministry rather than asking for help and it being provided. Hone asks whether, please ask the principals why schools insist on having modern learning environments with huge numbers of students in a large space when research shows that students with neurodiverse characteristics often struggle in these environments. Ngā mihi, Hone, unfortunately that was a pre-recorded interview so I couldn't add that question in, but thank you for the observation. Ray, teachers are expected to have more and more skills, etc., but no extra pay. Ministry employ more and more experts to monitor and assess teachers, but many can't stand in front of a class and do what advisors recommend. Some more from you. Please give thought to the other 25 plus children who are in the classroom who also need the teacher's attention. Megan says, yes for teacher training in the neuroscience of learning and behavioural problems. It breaks my heart the way Oars does not get to all the kids who need it. Perhaps extending the starting age to 7 years old might help some children. Megan's a teacher in Auckland. Another says, what's the trade-off of this? How can teachers teach effectively and manage the wide needs of learners? Recent news has identified the dire performance of New Zealand maths. Second point, we need to look at the cause of these students coming through with trauma needs. This is a huge societal issue. And perhaps one more, a very interesting and important conversation that shows the tension between the claim that student teachers need more time in the classroom that Bryce was making and the current speaker describing how classroom teachers can only teach or demonstrate what they know, hence the need for ongoing professional learning that is research-led, such as neuroscience. There have been more from you as well. We'll see if we get time for them a little bit later on, but thank you as always for your feedback. It is 21 minutes to 10. You are listening to 9 to Noon. Well, returning to a story we brought you earlier about delays in the processing of gun licences, including renewals. And police have admitted the ongoing delays in processing firearms licence applications and renewals are unacceptable, and they're working on solutions to reduce the wait list. Hunters have been frustrated by months-long delays, forcing some to sit the season out, with the duck shooting season just days away from starting and the deer roar already coming to a close. Police are working through a backlog of 8,788 firearm licence applications and are asking people to apply for renewals at least 4 months ahead of the expiry date. However, in answer to questions in Parliament recently, the Police Minister acknowledged that almost 5,000 applications have taken longer than 6 months to be processed. Whether it is renewals or new applications, the police are missing their own targets. Jevon McSkimming is the Deputy Commissioner of Police. Morena, and thank you very much for your time.
Sure, thank you.
So where are police at, in working through the backlog?
Actually, we believe the worm has turned, and in the last couple of weeks, we've actually progressed and closed out 600 application files, which was more than police has taken in the same period of time. And the 8,000 applications that are waiting are trending down.
The wait times, particularly for the licence renewals, which are potentially less complex than a new applicant where you have to establish the fit and proper person status, are they still as long as 4 months plus?
Yeah, we're recommending that people that are looking for a renewal of an application are putting those applications in 4 months in advance, and that gives them the best opportunity of staying current. What we are absolutely doing is focusing on renewals first and giving those people every opportunity to stay current. We've over doubled our workforce over the last sort of 18 months to make sure that this happens.
What's happened in the last fortnight to turn a corner?
Well, look, we've added a whole lot of new people. The system and the processes that these new staff need to apply is relatively complex in terms of determining fit and proper. And we are growing in terms of our capability and throughput as we have been focusing on quality.
Did police get caught out by the scale of this?
We've been going through a transformation program as a result of the Royal Commission of Inquiry, which has led us to really focus on the quality of the application process in terms of determining fit and proper. We have had a particular eye on that ball, and I think now it's about balancing so that we've got an eye on both in terms of making sure we're making good decisions around people being fit and proper, and also getting the throughput through the system so people can stay current and actually use the firearms for the purposes they've applied for them.
So what changed that caused things to slow so much? Obviously we know the Royal Commission's reports. Obviously we understand the current sensitivities and recent sensitivities. But what changed in practice that so slowed things?
Well, two things. The COVID has been a big part of that. COVID has, if you actually look at the application process, it requires police officers to attend a person's address. There are many vulnerable communities that have people who are making both renewal and new applications. So we couldn't go and do those for a significant period of time. The process has also meant that we are now looking at much more detail in terms of establishing that fit and proper and seeking more information. I think in terms of that, we're applying much more rigour to those and upskilling our people to a much higher level around that to respond to the Royal Commission of Inquiry. As we've grown our people's skill in this space, we're now focusing on getting that throughput through to match the high quality.
Are police doing things they were not doing before the Royal Commission but ought to have been doing? Ought to have been face-to-face meetings that weren't happening?
I think all of those things that are addressed in the Royal Commission of Inquiry that addressed quality have been there. What we have to do is make sure that police routinely and consistently apply them, and that's what we're actually focused on doing. The process has brought new rigour to those things to make sure there's assurance.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. Happy to take general questions, but if anyone wants to talk about the event I've just been a part of, feel free.
Prime Minister, just in regards to strengthening ties with the US, the Five Eyes decision, haven't you chosen China over the US?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by decision?
The Five Eyes decision.
Well, I think I'd probably my starting point would be that actually for us, Five Eyes continues and will always be very, very strategically important to New Zealand. But also going forward, we will continue to make sure that we work with our partners on issues around human rights, democracy, and as we have always done, make sure that we raise our concerns in those arenas on an ongoing basis, because that's in keeping with New Zealand's independent foreign policy. So the point I'm making is that there has been no change in that regard.
So you're saying you haven't chosen China?
Absolutely not. In fact, New Zealand has an independent foreign policy. We are proud of our independent foreign policy. We have never chosen partners per se. We have always chosen to stand on our values, which are strongly embedded in the importance of democracy and human rights.
It's certainly strained those ties with the US though, hasn't it?
No. In fact, there's been no suggestion or nothing that any of my interactions have demonstrated that there is any such strain. So no, I would reject that.
Do you think that New Zealand is a pawn in a way in this power play between US and China?
No, also, again, I think the point that I'd make is that New Zealand has actually been really consistent. And in having that independent foreign policy, over decades, we have never been in the position of choosing sides. We have always been on the side of New Zealand's interests and New Zealand values. They are, of course, support for international rules and norms and the importance to us of human rights and democracy, and that takes precedent over everything.
What has China's response been to you when you raise issues regarding your concerns with the treatment of the Uyghurs?
And we have done that consistently, be it through statements or in bilateral arrangements. And of course, as you would expect, we respectfully put both our own positions on the issue. And the response I receive is often very similar to, of course, what you see in the public domain.
Should New Zealand Rugby take the deal of civil
Well, ultimately, that will be a decision for New Zealand Rugby. The offer that's been made there, the negotiation that is underway, is not something that directly involves the New Zealand government. What we've encouraged is for talks with New Zealand Rugby amongst players, and of course the interests of the provincial unions to all be taken into account as they move through this decision, which is for them.
Prime Minister, looking at some of the talks there, some of the conversations were about the human rights within China. So will you support a move in Parliament to declare that a genocide has been in China?
So the act of declaring a genocide is actually one that's really governed by a set of international criteria and definition. New Zealand has only done that on 3 occasions, recognising obviously as part of World War II, but also Rwanda and Cambodia. And so because there is a process there that is defined by international definition, the New Zealand government has not taken that step at this stage. What's been put before us as a parliament, however, is a different question. So it's been moved by the ACT Party. The New Zealand Labour Party is yet to consider its position, but I expect we'll do that as part of our caucus meeting the next time we meet.
When you talk about this process, is that something that you're interested in looking at and that you're interested to begin this process?
Well, it's actually started a dialogue for us on where New Zealand declares something as significant as a genocide. And of course, keeping in mind there's been a number of occasions where we recognise atrocities, but the step of recognising a genocide, our Minister for Foreign Affairs has actually sought advice over Armenia. So that has been a trigger for us to have that conversation of where we have declared something genocide, and she is seeking advice on that.
Another topic was around the vaccines. Are you disappointed looking at the vaccine rollout in Northland? Did you expect it to be further along than what it is now?
I think actually you'll see now that we have been releasing the targets that district health boards have for the vaccine rollout, and taken as a collective, we are actually not only on track but currently exceeding the expectations across the country. What we're seeing are specific challenges within different district health boards, and that is not surprising. Some district health boards have rural isolation issues to overcome as part of their rollout, but we've always had that flexibility for DHBs to take the steps they need to make sure that they're trying to reach their goals and, importantly, reach their community.
Are we seeing the fear around vaccines that were prominent in those Northland communities starting to fade away, and that the anxiousness around the vaccines is starting to lessen?
I think what's been really interesting is that, we've continued to try and get a snapshot of how New Zealanders are feeling about the vaccine. And I think one of the benefits of our approach, which has been a very steady rollout of the vaccine across the country, making sure we continue to ramp up over time, is that that's given people time to become comfortable with the vaccine. We've put it through all of the independent processes we need, but that extra time, I think, is definitely starting to see, and we're seeing this in some of our research, reduce down some of the hesitancy that may have existed.
On another topic, do you accept that some emergency housing is inhumane?
Well, our goal, of course, is to make sure that everyone has access to warm, dry, affordable housing. When we inherited the housing crisis we're dealing with, we had situations where people, for instance, were in cars. We want people to be housed. That does mean that in some cases we are using temporary accommodation that is not fit for purpose for the long term, but is making sure that we're keeping people in safe places with shelter, that they are warm and dry.
So you'd say that some emergency housing is not inhumane?
Oh, I'd say that, when we're contrasting with some of the experiences people we're having, that while I absolutely acknowledge that the use of, for instance, motels is not a long-term solution, I definitely don't want a scenario where in New Zealand we have people that are not in shelter at all. That would be absolutely wrong.
So what other plans do you have to get wraparound support services, and why has it taken so long?
So we already have a workforce that are providing wraparound support for people who are in a temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation like motels. So that social work provision's been really important. They also have access to flexible funding to support ongoing connection to health services and, for instance, education. We've also established housing brokers through MSD to try and add extra support for families to find accommodation that may be, in some cases, in the private sector.
Rents have started to increase. When you warned this would happen, and why did you go ahead with the changes anyway?
Of course, we had the suggestion that we would see exponential increases. What we've tended to see over a period of time is that they've been more in the order of 3%. What's been key for us is keeping an eye on whether or not those rent increases are outstripping, for instance, what we'd expect to see in people's income increases. Overall, the significant house price growth we haven't seen translated in the same way to the rental market, but it is something that we're keeping a very close eye on. Keep in mind as well, we have made changes to tenancy law, including, for instance, only one rent increase per year for a tenant, to try and make sure that we are seeing really manageable increases for tenants across the country.
You have been given lots of housing advice. How did you decide which to follow and which to ignore?
We do get a range of advice, and often departments will take different views. For us, it was about making those decisions that would tilt housing towards first home buyers away from what we were seeing in the data, which was an exponential increase in investors in the market.
Why Northland is performing relatively badly in terms of COVID vaccine rollout? Is it because the goal too high for them, or is it because the DHB is underperforming?
I think actually it would be unfair, given the different circumstances DHBs experience, to make a call that any DHB at this stage is failing. They have different challenges. Northland DHB is covering a widely dispersed, often rural and isolated communities. They're taking steps now, and they have the ability to take steps to try and increase their rate of vaccination, and we wanted that flexibility in our vaccine rollout so they can respond to those needs. Okay, thanks everyone.
Nations have reached a significant milestone. What are the other big matters about at the moment?
Well, we've reached 50% of the vaccinatable adult population. That's without the younger people, and we're now down to the people between, I think, 42 and 45 being invited to come in for vaccination. I just had my second jab 2 or 3 days ago. It's all going full steam ahead. The government has just bought a huge number of Pfizer vaccinations to supplement the AstraZeneca vaccinations that we have at the moment, and everything is absolutely hunky-dory in Britain as far as the vaccinations are concerned. It all seems to be going according to plan. We have very few deaths. I think there were 22 deaths, I heard the other day. We have very few new infections. Most of Britain is now more or less COVID-free. There are a couple of black spots in different parts of the country.